Hi, everybody. This is Philip Martin, and this is Audi. Audi joined me up here a few minutes ago, and I don't know why, because it's pretty outside. It's not storming, there's no thunder or anything, but she decided she wanted to come see, so she came, saw, and I'm going to hold on to her until she gets tired and leaves. Okay? I am doing a class right now. Probably right now as you're watching this. If you're watching this on Friday morning, I am now engaged in my Life Quest class, which is I've been doing it for more than 10 years. I talk about movies, I talk about TV shows. Why I had planned to do this this is a mini series. I was going to go examine a mini series by Mike White from 2010 called Enlightened. Laura Dern was co-creator and she starred in it. Unfortunately, we are not in a classroom. We are doing this on Zoom, and Zoom has certain limitations I am not able to defeat. Some people have been able to do this. I do not know how. But I can't show the DVDs over Zoom for some reason, for copy protection or something prevents me to doing that. Now, there are other things I can show on Zoom, so that's what we're going to. We're going to go back and we're going to show some movies. And I haven't even quite finalized what I'm going to show. As I sit here today, I think I'm going to show rules of the game and we'll talk about that. But that could change between now and then, so, whatever. But anyway, this got me to thinking about... And other things too. I mean, like last week I wrote about my personal top 10 and whatever that means. And, I'm sort of ambivalent about that, but it got me thinking about great movies, about, what movies really matter to me and what really shape me. And I go back and I think about the earliest experiences. And my earliest experience in the movies I can remember was Safe at Home, which is Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle, and they visit this kid who claims to have been friends with him or something, and they bail him out of a jam in his kindergarten, junior high school, whatever it is. I don't know. I haven't seen it forever, but I do remember that from when I was very, very young. But that's and I confused it with real life, as I think young children may be inclined to do with motion pictures sometimes, because people are on screen talking. I kind of thought that Roger Maris was an uncle of mine or something. That's the sort of thing that. Yeah. But the first real impactful movie that I remember was Bonnie and Clyde, 1966. Arthur Penn, Sean's dad. And my memories about this, and I've told this story, and I've written about this story several times, and they kind of don't make sense, because what I remember, not what happened, but what I remember, so what's true to me, because my mind believes this, is that my parents dropped me and my 9-year-old sister off at a theater in downtown San Bernardino, California, in 1969 or whatever it came out. I mean, it must have been 1969 and I saw it then. That doesn't make sense for a couple of reasons. Number one, Bonnie and Clyde was not the kind of movie you would drop your 10-year-old son off to see as a matinee. But I do remember, whatever movie it was I went to see, there was a trailer out front. And in the trailer was a purported death car, 1934 Ford Desert Sand Model A. It was all shut up. And you walk through the trailer, and you could look inside the car, and you could see memorabilia. You could see Clyde's machine guns, Thompson machine gun, Bonnie's notebooks, purportedly. You could see, all this junk they had strewn about in the car. And the carney, or whoever was running this operation, made very sure that I, as a 10-year-old kid, saw the death mask. Bonnie and Clyde's death mask, that they put on, and And I remember even then, I remember thinking these don't really look like anything. They just look like sort of generic masks. They just look like they could be anybody. And that's sort of fitting. I think that a lot of death cars travel the country in the wake of the release of the movie, and that a lot of them were fakes, and that it was just a matter of capitalizing on, get the 50 cents, from the people, and let them gawk. It was just a commercial opportunity, and they took it. I don't have any real clear idea whether I actually saw the actual death car, the actual death mask, or any of that stuff. I do remember that, and I remember that better than whatever movie it was that I did see. I did see a newsreel, which I've since located on, YouTube, and I've watched it again, about the ambush of Donnie and Clyde, which I'll get into later, but that happened. My sister used to own the horse ranch that was right there by the side of the road. If you'd have gone 15 feet past where Bonnie and Clyde got killed, you would have been what became her property. But anyway, she doesn't have that anymore. But, we romanticize outlaws. But Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were really nobody special. The only talent they really had was maybe for ruthlessness and for a certain willingness to, behave badly. She had married somebody, I think she was 16, she married this guy, this safecracker named Roy Thornton, and Roy Thornton promptly went off to jail for 99 years, and I don't think she ever saw him again, so she worked in some cafes in Kansas City and Dallas, and she at some point hooked up or ran into this guy, Clyde Barrow, a scrawny guy who'd been he was a car thief, had been to prison, was sold for a carton of cigarettes, was all screwed up. I mean, there's a good chance that Bonnie Parker was the only member of the Clyde Barrow gang that Clyde never slept with. If you read about this, Bonnie had really taken up with Ray Hamilton, who was going to be Clyde's lieutenant in his gang. And if you watch the romanticized version, the Arthur Penn's movie version of this, you get some of that. I mean, there are other sources. I mean, it's like the sources I've read a lot of stuff about this, and I think that there's a lot of wishfulness and speculation in this. I mean, some people have claimed that Clyde was robustly heterosexual, and that in the movie, Warren Beatty invented this Clyde's impotence, just to add some complexity to his character. Because the first time the movie Clyde is alone with Bonnie and things are getting kind of, he begs off telling her he's not much of a lover boy. And, Bonnie goes, Faye Dunaway, your advertising's just dandy. Folks will never guess you don't have a thing to sell. So this banter is kind of cool. Penn had... the original script, if I'm right, had imagined the characters as bisexual, and Penn and Beatty thought it might lead audiences to infer that his murder instincts tendencies were somehow due to this sexual deviancy. So they made him impotent, made him a sexually neutered character. So you don't have to deal with this whole homosexual as monster sort of dynamic, which is an interesting thing to have done back in, 67? Yeah, 67, 68 when it came out. The truth, who knows the truth? Clyde, had weak, watery features, and Bonnie Birdie has these looks, and you look at them in magazine photos, and sometimes they look fine. Sometimes they look very sexy and young, and other times they just seem hard and stark as any other Depression-era photograph you can see. It doesn't really matter the actual Bonnie and Clyde. I think that Faye Dunaway and Clyde and Warren Beatty have sort of supplanted them. I think they are more important in the American consciousness. The movie characters are more important than the actual people. Actual people are horrible murderers, okay? But what we're talking about is this myth that Penn created, and basically going back to, it borrows from it's sort of interesting because it's sort of like the French New Wave borrowed from American B movies. It was sort of like the Beatles heard, and the Rolling Stones heard this music over here coming out of Mississippi and Chicago, and they did their version of it and rebounded back. That's sort of the same thing with the B movies and stuff that goes to the French New Wave, and then it rebounds back in this late wave in the 70s of Bonnie and Clyde and all these, kind of independent movies that we think of from that time, from the late 60s to the early 70s, Easy Rider, things like that, they all have a lot to do with the French New Wave. And I probably don't have time to go into that now, and sign up for a class from me sometimes and we'll talk about that. But anyway, Bonnie and Clyde are part of our myth. That's they're forever young, forever beautiful, forever dangerous in the collective consciousness. Now, you may know that they were ambushed, they were shot, and it was like they didn't have a chance. They were shot down dead outside Arcadia, Louisiana, where my sister had a horse ranch in the 80s and 90s. She lived there. 15 feet from where Bonnie and Clyde were murdered was her property line. So I was past this monument all the time, and it was all shot up, and it's sort of weird. After the ambush, they hauled the car, the death car, the actual death car, probably not the one I saw. They haul it up to Arcadia, Louisiana, and before they get there, they stop at a school. They let the children look in it and rub their hands across the sheet metal and stuff. They put Bonnie and Clyde's bodies out in front of a place called Congress Furniture, and thousands of people came from 2 and 3 states away over the course of the next couple of days to look at the bodies. The owners of the Ford, Ruth Warren, had been stolen from her, had to file a federal lawsuit before the Bienville Parish Sheriff would give her car back to her. Okay. So we see this newsreel footage of it, and it says on the frame, it says captured by an amateur photographer 5 minutes after the Texas Rangers had shot the car. And it's a reenactment of the ambush with actual footage of the shot up car and stuff like that. They staged this reconstruction really days after the criminals were assassinated, Assassinated. That's really what happened in 1934. You can find it on YouTube. I have. But let's just talk about the movie. Penn's Bonnie and Clyde is where this realistic hard violence sort of enters the American lexicon. And it's married to a gleeful comedy. Specifically, there's an early scene where Clyde shoots a middle-aged bank manager in the face after he's jumped on the wagon, on the running board of the getaway car. He shoots him in the face. This is one of the earliest instances where American movie audiences are faced with this graphic consequences of violence. Before, it was like all this, oh, I'm shot, and, you see people flying backwards and fall over, but you don't see, this didn't cut away from the victim's face. We see the blood and what appear to be bits of brain and bone that fleck on that car window. And it's it's played in a way as comedy with this horror undercutting it. And you get this reaction shot of Clyde visibly shaken, like, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. And by the time he blames the getaway driver, Michael J. Pollard, C.W. Moss. You shouldn't have parked the car. You should have kept it running and idling outside the bank. He couldn't have jumped on us that way. I wouldn't have had to shoot him through the eye. That sort of thing. This is the first sober punctuation in that film that, for the most part, was effervescent, kind of jazzy romance. Asexual romance, but jazzy nonetheless. It's kids on the run. It's young kids on the run, and the mode of Fritz Lang's You Only Live Once, Nicholas Ray's They Live by Night, and Gun Crazy, Joseph Lewis, 1950. Which were all inspired by the actual Bonnie and Clyde. Now, Penn's Bonnie and Clyde weren't the first anti-heroes to be on screen. In Lang's movie, You Only Live Once, his sympathies are obviously with the doomed couple, Joan, Sylvia, Sidney, and Eddie Taylor, Henry Fonda. At the end of You Only Live Once, he had them ushered into heaven by a prison chaplain, that Eddie had killed. So it's kind of like, this is not the first time this has happened, that we've romanticized criminals and made these anti-heroes heroes, There's a tender, it's like Nicholas Ray's Live by Night has a tender moment between his romantic outlaws, and their words are superimposed over this boy and this girl or never properly introduced to the world we live in. You know, it's sort of like, which is sort of interesting and sophisticated perspective from, you know, you're going back to the 40s and 50s when when you think, well, okay, maybe society is driving these people to do what they're doing. Maybe it's not just this innate badness or evilness, this turpitude inside them that's doing it. It's like they're doing what they have to do to stay alive in the society. Okay, we find them corny, you know, and a couple of years ago in my Life Quest class, I screened They Live by Night, and I was surprised by their indifference to it. And I think their indifference to it was because they'd seen it before. They'd seen it in later movies that came after that, and it lost, you know, some of its juice. Bonnie and Clyde still has that power, I think. It's a strange marriage of glee and horror and these abrupt shifts of tone. Again, from the French New Wave. And at the end of the movie, the ambush that is really... They take a lot of liberties with it. It's brilliantly edited. It's a great piece of cinema. In real life, Clyde Barrow never got out of his car. He just slumped over. But Warren Beatty, you know, realizes the trap. The sun glints off his glasses, and he... I remembered, you know, that he somehow shot back at them, but he doesn't. If you really look at it, you really, he doesn't roll across shooting the thing. But we watch the bodies jerk. We hear Faye Dunaway shriek. In 1989, Penn was asked about this by Terry Gross on her Fresh Air program. He said, we were operating in a totally different social context in those days. It was in the midst of the Vietnam War, and the daily news that we saw on television had body counts, numbers of soldiers wounded and dead. It was a time where it seemed to me we were going to depict violence. We were obliged to depict it accurately, with the kind of terrible, frightening volume that one sees when one is genuinely confronted by violence. And that's what we did in Bonnie and Clyde. He was trying to raise these two characters to a faintly mythic proportions, propel them into myth. That's exactly the purpose of that ending. And it's interesting how he achieved it. They had 4 cameras, chained together, gang together, running at different speeds. So you could, you know, play it back and you get, you know, slow motion and different types of slow motion. And you have the time, the attenuation of time that you feel if you've ever been in an accident or something, in a car accident, you feel things slowing down and you feel like you can almost moving in slow motion as the car turns over and stuff like that. That's what they were trying to do. This spastic, balletic violence, you know, at the end of the film. You know, I'm not somebody who's really interested in all the technical techniques. I'm interested in I'm interested in the effects. I'm interested in how we perceive it and what we do it. I didn't connect it with Vietnam at the time. How could I? Well, let's see. I did see it in '68. I was 9, or '69. I was 10. You know, in movies, you could have seen a 1967 movie in '69 in those days if you lived out, you know, in the Inland Empire of Southern California. Things were not there as quickly as they were in L.A., you know, so it could have been. It's the first movie I think I loved for itself. I mean, I'd seen other movies and I liked them, and I liked them because they made my dad happy. I liked them because, you know, the experience of going to the theater was something. But this was a movie that I really... I don't know. It was one of my first movies. One of the first movies I saw without adult supervision, whether I saw it without adult supervision or not. I wasn't ready to see it. It was a movie that I saw before I was old enough to appreciate it, obviously. I shouldn't have seen it as a pre-adolescent. But I know by 1969, when we went to see Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which was in '69, and we pretty early after that film opened because my dad was a Paul Newman fan. That was already part of my reference because I kind of have a vague feeling of talking about it. And when they freeze that frame at the end, when at the end of Sundance, George Hill ends it with a freeze frame, which sort of implies that we don't know what happened. That maybe somehow Butch and Sundance could have got out alive. I saw that. That was in conversation with the ending of Bonnie and Clyde, No jerking bodies there, Those bodies are frozen in amber. We don't know what happened to them. I mean, we can guess, we can surmise, but there's no conclusion showed to us by the filmmaker. And I remember my dad thought that Hill's ending was better. And that may have just been because he didn't like, he may have just been a little squeamish about the violence of the ending of Bonnie and Clyde. I think now, it's a wishful ending. It's tonally appropriate. It's fine. I know Bush and Sundance didn't get away, and Bonnie and Clyde didn't have this apotheosis where they were raised into myth. They're baptized in this hail of bullets. But it's just something pretty to think about. That's what film is doing. That's the art of film, is converting. It's telling us these stories. It's taking this material and really manufacturing myth. Stuff we can kind of use as shorthand that fits into our cultural, our collective consciousness, our reservoir of common ideas. So we have these two endings of these two films. I've got to watch Butch and Sundance again now. And what I didn't know at the time, and what I know now as a big shot movie man, is at the end of Butch and Sundance is an homage to the 400 Blows, Francois Truffaut's semiotic biographical film that also ends on a freeze frame. And Truffaut's purpose, I think, is to explicitly renege on the contract between the filmmaker and the audience. In exchange for putting 2 hours or whatever you spend watching the movie, you get an easy resolution. Well, he does not give that. He withholds that resolution, suggesting there's more to the story of the kid, the Anton in the film, than we get to see. Hill is teasing us with this what if about these outlaws who rumor, legend says got away, so. And that's sort of like other filmmakers have picked up on that cue. Mateo Gill's 2011 film Blackthorn starred Sam Shepard as a aging Butch Cassidy, who's living in Bolivia, who got away. Anyway, I don't know that you could separate Bonnie and Clyde from its time. I mean, it was released during the Summer of Love, so 68, and it kind of anticipated that curdling of the hippie dream, sort of like even before Altamont, you had Bonnie and Clyde. Vietnam was in the living room every night. Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. had months to live. Charles Manson was creepy crawling around Southern California. LBJ is going to abdicate. It didn't seem then in 68 like the center could quite hold. Outlaw nihilism was a viable option then. I was talking to a friend of mine at lunch yesterday, and I remembered this, that he said he remembered this. He said that he remembered when Bonnie and Clyde came out, it didn't get really good reviews. And I said, you're right. I said, in fact, it probably cost the New York Times critic Bosley Crowder his job, because he wrote this long and really peevish review of the film for the Times. He called it I'm quote here, a cheap piece of bald-faced slapstick comedy that treats the hideous depredations of that sleazy moronic pair as though they were full of fun and frolic as the jazz aids cut up in thoroughly modern Millie. Carol Burnett movie. Such ridiculous, camp-tinctured travesties of the kind of people these desperados were and of the way people lived in the dusty Southwest back in those barren years might be passed off as candidly commercial movie comedy, nothing more. Yet the film weren't reddened with blotches of violence of the most grisly sort. This blending of farce with brutal killings is as pointless as it is lacking in taste, since it makes no valid commentary upon the already travestied truth. Now, I can almost see Bosley Crowder's point, especially since he had never seen a Bonnie and Clyde before, and he did not have the advantages that we have of having seen, like Quentin Tarantino and The Wild Bunch and all these movies come down the pike that make maybe not a virtue of their violence, but they use it in a way that encourages thoughtful people to think. Now, it may also encourage unthoughtful people to act, and that's sort of a worrisome thing. I'm always for giving the artist the tools and permission to do what they want to do and then to judge it afterwards. So, whether or not Bonnie and Clyde is a good film or a morally deleterious film, it's up to us to decide. And I think the jury has pretty much come down on the side that Bonnie and Clyde's a great American movie. And when something comes out that's shocking like this, I remember The Natural Born Killers, which was an obvious, I think, I think Oliver Stone had Bonnie and Clyde very much in mind when he was making this. He had a lot of stuff very much in mind when he was making that film, which is just dense and chock full of illusion, even down to the names of the characters, Mickey and Mallory, which are TV sitcom names. And I could go into a big thing on that. I'm not going to because we're almost at 30 minutes here. But, I think that, we kind of have to take the brunt of these movies. We have to roll with the punch, get up and go, what was that about? Often it's not just gratuitous. Often we're getting hammered for a reason, and smart filmmakers, smart actors, know how to get inside us and to kind of color the way we view these things. And I mean, like I said, I don't think that anybody now would think that there was anything like gratuitous about Bonnie and Clyde. You may disagree. I don't know. Anyway, that's it for this week. We may be talking more about great movies in the future. We may not. Depends on what's going on week to week. So talk to you later. Take care. And Audi stayed the whole time. Say goodbye, Audi. Bye, Audi. Say goodbye. Okay.